Well, good morning again, everyone. Before I was ordained a priest, I was an intern for 2 years at St. Francis of Assisi Church up on Hartford Road in Northeast Baltimore. In fact, I did that the year after I did my summer internship here at St. Bernardine's. Remember that, Deacon? Yeah. He's the only one that got old. I didn't get old, right? Well, anyway, at St. Francis, we used to give out grocery bags every Monday morning at the rectory door. Much like we do here at St. Bernardine's with our food pantry. But at St. Francis, Father Burke, if you know Father Burke, he just didn't really have much time or patience with rules and regulations and criteria and stuff. So we never really checked anybody's ID to see where they lived or verified anything about their financial situation. We just lined them up at the door and we gave the bags out, first come, first served. And when we were done, we were done. Now, we knew that there would be some people who took advantage of that indiscriminate generosity. Neighbors would say that they would see some of the folks take their grocery bags down Hartford Road to Clifton Park and sell them. They, of course, assumed it was for drug money. Others would say they saw them take the grocery bags around the corner to Herring Run Park, and the same group of people would pack in 4 or 5 grocery bags to the same car, and then they would all drive away. And so many of the parishioners thought that we needed a more targeted way of distributing the grocery bags to make sure that they were getting to the truly needed and only the truly needy. And isn't that what many of us would think? I mean, especially on the public level, isn't the debate about social services always how are we going to know that the people who really need the assistance is going to get the assistance, and that those who don't need it shouldn't get it? And maybe sometimes in our own personal lives, in our own personal generosity, we feel the same way, that we'd much rather be generous where we know it's going to make an impact, where we know there's going to be some good return for our generosity, rather than take a chance that someone might just take advantage of our generosity. Well, anyway, at St. Francis one Monday morning in the spring, I noticed a little boy, 10-year-old boy, in the line up for the grocery bags. And when he got to the door, he told me that his name was Daniel, and that his mother was pregnant, and that she wasn't able to get to the church, and could he take a grocery bag back to her. So I set a bag aside and asked him to wait a few minutes, and we handed out all the rest of the grocery bags. And then I took that one grocery bag and walked back with him to where his mother was staying. And his mother, whose name was Rhonda, he and his mother were living in an unfinished basement of a row house in pretty awful conditions. And she had explained that she had been a registered nurse at a local hospital, but then she had switched over to a nursing agency because her hours would be more flexible and it would allow her to be able to take care of Daniel better. And in fact, the pay was better through an agency. The difficulty arose when she became pregnant and then had complications with the pregnancy, because then she couldn't work anymore. And those of you who work for an agency may know there are no health benefits in those jobs. So now she couldn't work and she had no health benefits. And as a result, they could no longer afford to pay the rent where they were staying. And they ended up in this unfinished basement. She had applied for unemployment and disability benefits, but they hadn't yet kicked in. So I made sure that each week when Daniel would come to the door that I walked back with him with a bag of groceries for him and his mother. And all along, the neighbors would complain that people were taking the bags of groceries and selling them for drugs, or they were hoarding them in their cars. And the parishioners were saying we really needed to find a more targeted way of giving out these bags. Well, one day, Monday, as we were giving out groceries, I noticed a lady in the lineup who I had met here the previous year at St. Bernardine's. And her name was Miss Essie. And when she came to the door, I asked her, how was it that she was in Northeast Baltimore? And she said, well, she had been living with her daughter here in Edmondson Village, but that her daughter's drug abuse problem had become so bad that she could no longer live with her. And so she found a place up in Northeast. And she had seen the line of people every Monday getting grocery bags at St. Francis, and she decided she would get in the lineup as well. So now I took Daniel and his grocery bags and Miss Essie's grocery bag, and I said, I'll walk them back for you. And it turns out that Miss Essie was living in the same row house that Daniel and his mother were living in. But she was living in the upper level of the row house. It was in better shape than the basement, but Miss Essie had no furniture, and she basically just had a mattress on the floor for her bed. And then she introduced me to a gentleman on the first floor who was disabled, and he asked if he might be able to get a grocery bag as well, but he wouldn't be able to get to the church on Monday mornings. So now every Monday morning, I was carrying 3 bags of groceries from the church to this row house. And all along, the neighbors were complaining that people were selling their groceries for drugs, and others were hoarding them. And the parishioners were saying we really needed a much more targeted system to give out grocery bags. Well, as the summer wore on, I learned that Rhonda was in a lawsuit with her landlord. It turns out that he had tried to lock her out of the basement without any notice or eviction process. And if you know anything about housing law, that's a no-no. So I decided to accompany her to court when the case was being heard. And there I met the landlord of the row house. Now, he was a young man, seemed nice enough, and maybe because he saw the collar, he figured he would try to explain his side of the story. And he explained how he had inherited the house and he had been trying to sell it, but he wasn't getting any takers. And so the only way he could afford the mortgage on the house was if he opened it up to renters. And he really wasn't in the renting business, so he didn't know what the law required of him. It's sort of the defense that the Speaker of the House makes for the president. I mean, he was new at it. So I sympathetically listened to his story, and when he finished, I simply informed him that I was an attorney and that I would happily sue him for the substandard conditions in which he was allowing his tenants to live. Remember that next time you see a collar. So he quickly put me in touch with his real estate agent, and after a bit of going back and forth, we arranged to have Rhonda and his mother put into subsidized housing, and Miss Essie and the gentleman on the first floor into senior housing, where they would have access to the services they needed. And I might mention that I had the landlord pay for the security deposit and the first month's rent. And that bought Rhonda enough time for her benefits to kick in. And all along, the neighbors are complaining that people are selling their grocery bags for drugs, and others are hoarding them. And the parishioners were saying we really needed a better targeted system to hand out the grocery bags. Well, we continued to hand out those grocery bags indiscriminately every Monday morning. But now, at the end of the summer, Rhonda and Daniel, Miss Essie, and the man on the first floor, they weren't among them because they all now had affordable housing. In fact, that Christmas, Rhonda called me and told me that she had given birth to a baby girl and that she and her new baby and Daniel were living well in her apartment, that she was back at work, and it was going to be a very happy Christmas. All because of the indiscriminate generosity of the parishioners at St. Francis. And still, the neighbors complained that people were selling their grocery bags for drugs, that others were hoarding them, and that the parish really should have a targeted system for handing out these bags. A sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. It sprang up at once because the soil was not deep. But when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil, and it produced fruit 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear. Amen.